Fall Out Boy is one of the biggest and most influential bands to come out of the pop punk and emo scenes. While Fall Out Boy certainly were not alone in shaping the rock and alternative landscape since the 2000s, their influence and legacy have been among the most enduring. And in this video, I explore the many ways in which the band has been influential on rock or its subgenres throughout the band's history. Fall Out Boy have been very influential by bringing to the mainstream a distinct blend of elements of emo, pop punk, pop, and hardcore punk in the form of edgy guitar riffs and instrumentation, occasional unclean vocals, catchy and often very wordy hooks, theatrical and dramatic elements, powerful and at times impossible to understand vocals, biting and poetic lyrics, pop culture references, and perhaps most importantly, long song titles, even if they weren't necessarily the first band to use or combine those elements in their music. Fall Out Boy was part of a particularly influential and successful wave of bands in the mid to late 2000s, caused in large part by the Fueled by Ramen label, and to a lesser extent Fall Out Boy themselves, I would argue, along with Panic! At the Disco, My Chemical Romance, and Paramore, who all played a major role in shaping mainstream emo and scene culture through their music, fashion, and their association with and embrace of internet culture and early social media platforms such as Friends or Enemies, LiveJournal, and MySpace, the former which Pete Wentz created. And at their peak, these bands were a dominant force in mainstream rock and alternative and youth culture, let alone in the pop punk and emo scenes and on music charts and on the radio, and they continue to be influential in these spheres. While all of these bands were very big and influential, and what I'm claiming here is certainly debatable, I would argue that Fall Out Boy are probably the most prominent and influential overall of these bands, given that they were arguably the most commercially successful and most visible of the four bands in mainstream culture, at least by some metrics such as music charts like the Billboard Hot 100 and radio hits, and they also helped discover and sign Panic! At the Disco as well as many other bands in this wave, even if Panic! At the Disco also seemed to be influential to Fall Out Boy, like with the orchestral elements in Thanks for the Memories, for example.
Gonna make it bend and break. Say a prayer, but let the good times.
And Fall Out Boy are probably the most influential band from this wave on the pop punk genre, one of the most influential pop punk bands overall, and one of the biggest rock bands of the last 20 years. And bands that have been influenced by their sound to varying degrees include various bands ranging from All Time Low and The Main to Set It Off, 5 Seconds of Summer, and Water Parks. While a cultural shift was already beginning within the scene before them with bands like Jimmy Eat World and other significant bands like Saves the Day and soon after Brand New and Taking Back Sunday having success combining emo and pop punk in the late 90s to early 2000s, Fall Out Boy and their mid-2000s mainstream success still played a significant part in the cultural shift of mainstream pop punk away from the earlier punk and skater influence culture of the genre's initial mainstream waves in the 90s and early 2000s toward poppier and more scene and emo influenced musical and cultural characteristics, depending on how you define the rather controversial term emo. And as mentioned, one way in which Fall Out Boy's influence stands out from many other bands is with their business-like approach to influencing bands in the previously mentioned large number of prominent bands signed to Pete Wentz's Decaydance imprint of the Fueled by Ramen label, which was later renamed DCD2 Records. While Fall Out Boy has supported many of these artists as well as other artists through tours and through collaborations, including Panic! At the Disco, The Academy Is, The Cab, Cobra Starship, and Gym Class Heroes. Pete Wentz's poetic and clever lyrical style that is often ironic and self-referential is simultaneously tongue-in-cheek and also very vulnerable and relatable through addressing mental health struggles such as bipolar disorder and substance abuse, and his lyrics in particular have been very highly regarded by many and have been influential on their own to many different artists both inside and outside the scene. And Pete Wentz himself, who was married to Ashley Simpson and was commonly featured in tabloids and magazines, became a celebrity with a significant following and an emo poster boy in his emo-influenced fashion where, again, he was not the first with dark side-swept bangs, eyeliner, skinny jeans, hoodies, and studded belts, as many aspects of emo fashion already existed previously, but his overall look combined with his somewhat iconic status and visibility as a significant celebrity still did a lot to further popularize this fashion trend and aesthetic in broader mainstream culture beyond the still somewhat niche emo and pop punk scenes along with other prominent emo influenced bands. While his embrace of early social media, as previously mentioned, including his frequent personal journal posts on LiveJournal, gained the band, and him in particular, a significant online following and further appealed to a generation of fans, especially teenage girls. In addition, he launched a successful clothing brand, Clandestine Industries, which had hoodies, t-shirts, and accessories with creative designs and a distinct logo that have appealed aesthetically to fans of emo, scene, and alternative culture. While their 2003 debut album, Take This to Your Grave, itself was influenced by and similar sounding to bands like Saves the Day, The Get Up Kids, and Newfound Glory, the band's talent for blending the energy of hardcore punk with the catchiness of pop, combined with relatable lyrics largely about teen heartbreak, launched the band's career, and the album has become known as a pop-punk classic and one of the most influential pop-punk albums of the 2000s. As mentioned, its breakout success played a major role in introducing hardcore and emo-influenced pop-punk to new audiences, and has been described as a blueprint for many pop-punk bands since who have been inspired by and tried to copy their sound. Their 2005 album From Under the Cork Tree, where they broke through to the mainstream with the hugely successful and now classic song Sugar We're Going Down, is also considered to be a very significant classic and defining album in pop-punk and 2000s rock, and which in my view is where they refined and truly found their sound as songwriters. And especially with their albums From Under the Cork Tree and Infinity on High, at least in my view, the band was among the first and was maybe the most prominent in their distinct combination of an upbeat, catchy pop-punk sound with occasionally darker melodies with dramatic half-step notes, and also dramatic, soulful vocals and ironic, self-referential, and clever wordplay exhibited by songs such as Dance Dance, and the previously mentioned Thanks for the Memories, and which is a sound that can be heard in songs by many pop-punk and emo-pop influenced bands, especially around 2006 to 2007, where often the singles by these bands would arguably have elements of this sound I'm describing, like When I Get Home You're So Dead by Mayday Parade, Hate I Really Don't Like You by Plain White T's, and Situations by Escape the Fate. Although it can also arguably be heard in slightly more recent bands like Set It Off. When the band reinvented their sound in the 2010s with their 2013 album Save Rock and Roll after their more experimental and at the time controversial album Folie à Deux underperformed and they went on hiatus, they largely transformed from a pop-punk band into stadium pop rock with extremely polished production and themic choruses and powerful, edgy-ish vocals that often became themes for sports games and more closely resembled Imagine Dragons or Maroon 5 than Blink-182, exemplified by My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark, Light 'Em Up, and the particularly massive success of Centuries off of the follow-up album American Beauty, American Psycho, which rivals that of Sugar We're Going Down in popularity. And with the success of these two albums, they were one of the few commercially successful rock bands remaining in a mainstream climate dominated by EDM and pop. And with their mostly new and reimagined sound, they helped to define and carve out a space for mainstream rock during the decade, while still retaining elements of their core sound in the form of Patrick's singing and catchy songwriting and Pete's writing style. In addition, perhaps in part due to their frequent collaboration with rappers and interest in hip-hop, but probably mainly because of them being part of that mainstream mid to late 2000s wave of bands that I mentioned, they have also been very influential to many emo rap artists, including prominent artists like Lil Peep and Juice WRLD, who both cited Fall Out Boy as a significant influence, along with other bands, while Nothing Nowhere is signed to Pete Wentz's label. A large reason for Fall Out Boy's massive success and influence is because of their raw and diverse talents. Pete Wentz's lyrical talent as well as business and marketing talent, Patrick Stump's songwriting and vocal talent, and Joe Troman and Andy Hurley's instrumental talents, combined with their ambitions, especially Pete Wentz's. But it's also arguably because Fall Out Boy have been consistently able to evolve their sound from album to album to both adapt to trends, whether it was pop punk, emo, and scene culture in the mid-2000s or pop rock trends in the 2010s, and experiment with and also help set them multiple different times. They have also both consistently and fully embraced pop elements throughout their career while also balancing this pop influence to varying degrees with some edge and or artistry, whether musically, lyrically, or aesthetically. And the band is also willing to experiment with many different styles, especially on later albums, including R&B, soul, funk, hip-hop, and electronic music, and also be bold, ambitious, and take risks, at least on occasion, like with their musical and creative experimentation on Folie à Deux, like with the soul influence and blues influence outro on Wham's, for example. And also like with the maybe slightly over-the-top title Save Rock and Roll, which still represented a risky transformation and which was controversial with existing fans, but which also represented a commercially successful musical reinvention and career comeback for the band. And even if some of those risks don't always necessarily pay off, like much of Mania, at least in terms of its fan reception and lack of successful singles, and especially Young and Menace, even if I'm personally a fan of the song and, at least in my view, its interesting sound and incorporation of EDM elements. And with their latest album, So Much for Stardust, they arguably successfully managed to pull off the difficult feat of combining elements of their older sound by adopting more of a rock influence and occasionally pop-punk sound, like with the lead single Love from the Other Side. But still with elements of their more recent poppier sound, like Heartbreak Feels So Good, while also incorporating newer musical elements for the band and further drawing from Patrick's many influences, like with What a Time to Be Alive, and pleasing much, if not all, of their fairly diverse fan base. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and also subscribing if you want to see more content like this, and also please leave a comment if you want to share your thoughts about Fall Out Boy's legacy and influence on pop-punk, emo, rock, alternative music, or just music in general. Alright, well, thank you again, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.